There's a lot of conversation around Bryce Young and CJ Stroud being QB1 in this year's NFL draft, but it looks like one very important head coach has his eye on Anthony Richardson. We got that coming up for you and much more on today's episode of Locked On NFL.
You are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Locked On NFL. It is a slightly differently melanated Friday episode of Locked On NFL today with Chris Carter and your boy Q out. But you've got myself, Ross Jackson, and Tony Wiggins at Shop Talking Wig on Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter as well, at Ross Jackson Nola. It is Locked On NFL, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube as well. So don't forget to subscribe and follow wherever you get your shows. And of course, this is the daily Monday through Friday NFL show, getting you through all the biggest stories around the National Football League. We appreciate you very much for making us your first listen of the day every single day. Tony and I are here to bring you some big conversations today, why it's important not to get bogged down with winning the offseason or winning at the podium in the NFL draft. The in-season part of all of it is the only thing that matters. Draft tendencies for a few really important NFL teams in this year's NFL draft, what you should be watching out for. But first, Tony, there's a whole bunch of conversation about Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, but what about Florida's Anthony Richardson? Is he QB1 in this year's NFL draft?
Man, these coaches love traits and they love upside. And when you are able to just imagine, I think they sit around and they imagine, they say, okay, what if we get this guy and he turns out to be that? And it's like, we're set forever. We're geniuses. Everyone's going to get jobs and we're
everybody getting hired.
Yeah, everybody gets hired. Even the quality control guy be a head coach in 2 years if this works out. I mean, they're still hiring people from McVay and Shanahan's, and, their staff. So the thing is everyone looks at that and they want the outlier thing. We got to remember a lot of these coaches, like Frank Reich. I was in the military in the 90s, and Frank Reich was making a comeback against Warren Moon. So they know what having a superior athlete, especially at that position, they know what it could mean. So I think they're willing to take a chance. By the way, Frank Reich is in a different position than he's a first-year coach. He could take that risk.
Absolutely. And I love that you brought up Frank Reich. It's like we planned this episode or something. The thing about it is that Frank Reich, according to Tony Pauline, apparently loves him some Anthony Richardson. So that's part of why we're having this conversation today, because they pick at number 1 overall, the Carolina Panthers do, in this year's draft. Here's what Tony Pauline said. I'm told that Frank Reich, if he had his way, would go with Anthony Richardson because of the upside, because of what Anthony Richardson could be 2 or 3 years down the road. Tony, this is a huge point right here that's being made, because where does the head coach factor into what an organization's decision is with the number 1 overall selection in the NFL draft? Because I can promise you that's not just going to be Frank Reich's decision. The other part of it is you're not just drafting this guy to see what he can do for you in 2023. And I think that's a lot of the way that a lot of folks outside of the NFL look at the NFL draft. Who's going to bring that immediate impact? That's not the way that NFL teams are looking at it. The NFL teams want to know what happens in 2 years, what happens in 3 years, how does this player grow year over year over year at the next level? Tony Pauline says that Frank Reich loves Anthony Richardson, but does that mean that the Carolina Panthers draft Anthony Richardson at number 1 overall?
No, it doesn't. And the reason why I can tell you that is this. There's a couple of lines of thinking. So I think about the owner, right? I think about most owners. They're billionaires, but they're not billionaire athletes. They're billionaires in business. Most people in business get to be billionaires because of their singular idea to think outside of the box, but they use the people around them and all of their human resources. They use those people. Those are the steady Eddie people. People that are dependable, people that are smart, people that can get the job done, right? People that are leaders, like when they turn their back, they're not worried about the product behind them because they have someone in charge, right? But the head coach, in a lot of these cases, especially with guys like Frank Reich or a head coach that's seen it before, they don't look at it that way. They want a guy to play beyond the X's and O's. You know what I'm saying? I've heard tell of GMs liking quarterbacks who were single, as opposed they want a 21-year-old guy who's a single guy who was running through the college campus before they want a 21-year-old guy who's married. It's like I heard this story. I heard they invite these guys in and they lay these magazines out. They might have National Geographic, Maxim. They will be more impressed with the guy that picks up that risque magazine.
Oh, goodness.
Than the dude that sits up there and wants to read about how some mountain lion in the snow lives on the side of a mountain. So they are yoked a little bit differently. I think there are more coaches that think like Dan Campbell than they are that think like Tom Coughlin. So when you think about that, they are more inclined to not go with the safety guy, to not go with the guy who can run the warehouse when they turn their back. They're most likely to go to the guy that has a certain skill set, like the guy on Taken, that he's acquired over a number of years, that is an outlier because they think that it could take him to another stratosphere.
Yeah, I think you look at the owners, you look at the GMs, you look at those folks, the non-football people, for the most part, right? There's a lot more football GMs than there ever will be football owners, that's for sure. But you look at all of that, and then you think about safety. That's what they want. That not the position safety, but they want the safe pick, right? So you think about the safe pick in this year's draft at quarterback. To me, that feels like CJ Stroud. CJ Stroud feels like the safest. He's got deadly accuracy. He showed you that he can use the mobility when necessary. He showed you that in the Michigan game in particular. You look at his experience working with high-level receivers, high-level running backs, high-level offensive line. That's what you're playing with in the NFL. I love your point around that you've made before. Let's not ding these guys for playing at the level with the level of teammates that they're going to have at the next level. That makes a ton of sense. And then, coaching, pro style offense, all those other things, that makes a ton of sense for me that he's the safe pick. Bryce Young might be the guy that has a ton of natural talent, but he's a little bit less safe. His stature, the talent that he's had around him, that isn't as good. If we're looking at last season, right? Last season, they didn't have the big receivers. They didn't have all that. He still balled out, but how much of that was scheme versus him being able to maximize pieces, things like that. So, and that's the Hendon Hooker question mark too. What's his ceiling when you remove him from that Heupel system, that wide receiver option system, and you put him at the next level? So for me, the safest pick is CJ Stroud. But I mean, when you're the Carolina Panthers and you're trying to change your franchise and you're trying to rebuild and you're trying to win a Super Bowl, is the safe pick the right pick? Or is the almost supernatural talent that you can't teach, that you can't coach, that you can't develop, that you can only kind of hone and focus, and Anthony Richardson, who is the most athletic player we've ever seen at the position based on his combine numbers, is that the way that you go? Is that high risk, high reward enough for you to take at pick number one? I think safety is a smart thing to do, but man, it's hard to say no to Anthony Richardson right now.
It is. And this is a franchise, even though it's not the same folks. I wonder how the fans feel, because let me give you something. Let me give you something about Carolina. Carolina actually had the guy who is the template for the dude we're describing in Cam Newton, right? And they reached their highest of heights, right? Think about what they also have had the last few years. They had Sam Darnold, who was safe. They had Baker Mayfield for a minute.
Teddy Bridgewater.
They've had like these quarterbacks that were chosen at the top of the draft, and in the consciousness of the minds of the Carolina fan base, the time when they had the most success is when they took the dude who was just like this. So, but I'm thinking about that, and then I'm thinking about this. How ironic are we having this discussion in a year where Lamar Jackson is sitting there just waiting for somebody to trade for him, and he is exactly what we're describing with Anthony Richardson, but smaller, and there are no takers. So I do think that it's easy to make this decision when you have a little bit of leeway. It's more difficult if you have to make this decision if you're Ron Rivera. If you're Ron Rivera, you want the safest thing out there. If you're Frank Reich,
you ain't going nowhere.
No, you're looking at the owner like, you're investing in me now, man. We're going to take this thing. And then Reich is going to actually convince the owner that the safe thing ain't the best for you. You need to take a chance and take a risk on this other guy if that's the case. I find all of this stuff ironic, and it's really, really funny to me.
Yeah, absolutely. If I'm Frank Reich, I'm telling the owner, Tepper, right away, I wasn't a safe choice. You took a big risk to come up with a big reward to get me here. Now let's do that same thing for my quarterback and then make sure that my name as a head coach is affixed to the quarterback my first year that I want to work with, not who my owner wants to work with. I'm absolutely with you on that. Speaking of, draft tendencies is what we have coming up next. There's a couple of teams that are picking highly in this year's draft that could potentially change the fabric of what the NFL draft looks like because of what we've seen them and watched them do time and time and time again. Tony and I are going to break that down here as we continue on with another episode of Locked On NFL, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On NFL is brought to you by our friends over at Ultimate Pro Football GM, who you're going to see a ton of as we get closer and closer to the NFL draft. I played the living crap out of this game real recently because I got stranded in Atlanta on a flight that got delayed. And so we're sitting there on the tarmac, ain't got no service, Wi-Fi's down, all that. And I was still able to jump on and fill all the time that I needed with Ultimate Pro Football GM because I don't need Wi-Fi. It's entirely offline. It's entirely free to play, all that. So I ran through like 3 seasons just running through and losing all the time because I'm not a great general manager. But if you think that you want to run your own football franchise, you want to manage free agency, the salary cap, coach hires, coordinator hires, sports doctors, like a whole bunch of stuff. And even with the NFL draft coming up, you want to get involved with that. You can even import rosters, all that stuff. You can find it today over at ultimate-gm.com or simply search Ultimate Pro Football GM in your app store today. And don't forget to use the promo code Locked On in all caps. You can get that 100% free boost to your franchise. That is Locked On, LOCKEDON, all one word, all caps in the game store to get that 100% free boost. Let's get its Ultimate Pro Football GM, ultimate-gm.com. Start your dynasty today. All right, everybody, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On NFL, your daily one-stop shop for all the biggest news around the National Football League. Tony Wiggins, Ross Jackson here with you today as we wrap up the week. Don't forget, we'll be right back with you on Monday for all you everydayers out there that are loving some Locked On. So, Tony, we've got draft tendencies to look at here. We have a couple of different teams early on in this year's draft that have the ability to kind of change the entire fabric of the draft. We've already seen it with the Chicago Bears doing what it is that the Chicago Bears do, looking for value. We have another team in the top of the first round, the Philadelphia Eagles, that have a lot of tendencies that are identifiable. They love speed in their draft. Howie Roseman loves trading, moving around. Who are some of the other teams, just looking at their tendencies, that have the ability to have a massive impact in the first round of this year's draft?
That's a very, very good question. I want to say Houston.
Houston's a good one.
Houston's a good one for me because Nick Caserio has done something that it's hard for fans to grasp. And what that is be patient. The patience, the things that they've done over the last couple of years after moving on from Deshaun Watson, they had a real, it's almost as if we do nothing, no one can get angry because we're not doing anything.
Right. And if I just stay still, no one will see me.
Yeah. We're only going to pick because we have to, right? But now you see they're picking 2 and they're picking 12. And in this draft, you're going to get some really, really good players. The other one is Atlanta. I was very critical of Fontenot I was glad he got the job. I know you don't want to hear this because you know, it's the Saints guy.
Hey, I'm still a fan of him.
Right. But when he got there, I thought, what is he doing? I recall them making the Matt Ryan money all accelerate into. I'm like, why didn't he spread it out? What is he doing? It seemed like for 2 years they didn't do a thing. Last year they didn't do a thing, and then up jumped the booger. They almost won the division by not doing a thing, right?
Right.
So they come out this year and they built some cachet with the fans, and they're still sitting at number 8. And all of a sudden they were able to convince Calais Campbell that they're closer than a team like Jacksonville.
Yeah.
Without a quarterback, I just think those teams that have exercised patience in the past, that have placed themselves in a very, very good position, you take the beating, you take all the unfortunate stuff. I really do think that they have put themselves in an incredible position. You mentioned Philly, the team you cover, New Orleans. They have a way of drafting. Yep. They have a guy that they like. New Orleans is always going to draft a receiver that can catch with his hands in the middle of the field. It just feels
they love their big old edge rushers,
and they love their edge rushers. They love their corners, and they love their front 7 guys. So it's just like when you see teams do a certain thing, Seattle, we didn't mention them.
Yeah,
Seattle,
that's what I was going to bring up next. Yeah.
If Seattle was a basketball team, they'd be the Memphis Grizzlies. It seems like they just draft a team. Somebody call them a Greyhound bus full of cane corsos. They draft the same guy every. Doesn't Tyreek Woolen look like those dudes from the Legion of Boom?
He really does. He really
looks
does.
like those guys, you know.
He fits.
So yeah, they know who they like, but Ross, and I don't know, we'll touch this later. That comes with not changing coaches all the time. That comes with a coach picking a GM picking the right coach, and then them deciding what they're going to do and cook together. And I think it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I always bring this up when we talk about the Seattle Seahawks and sort of making those unexpected picks, particularly to the back end of the first round. The Jordan Brooks signing or draft pick. That was, oh gosh, what year was that? 2020. I went nuts about that pick. I thought that was a terrible selection for them. I thought that was one of those picks that was just like, oh, here goes Seattle, just like doing their thing again, getting cute, whatever. And now Jordan Brooks is he's a staple in their defense. And then you look at what they've done on the outside, Tariq Woolen, getting, who's the other corner that they got over in the outside? Michael Jordan, one of those two.
Yeah.
They go out there and they grab all these guys that end up having this major impact on their team. And then you're kind of going like, okay, the first round selection is the one that's always so curious for them, but they're such sound drafters rounds 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. They're so good there. Another team that I think has the ability to have a major impact in this year's first round in particular is the Minnesota Vikings. Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, the general manager there, has absolutely no qualms with dealing with teams within the NFC North.
Yeah.
He'll deal within his division. He's got friends all around that division. And they love to trade back and gather more assets. And so if you're looking for a team, let's say that you don't have let's say you're the San Francisco 49ers and you don't have a first round pick, or you're the Las Vegas Raiders and you don't land your quarterback early on in the draft, but you think you might want to trade back into the first round to get that done. Or maybe the Seattle Seahawks go that route. 23 with the Minnesota Vikings is going to be a spot to watch for that.
Yes.
To where if you're a team that's really high on, let's say you want Hendon Hooker in the first round, or let's say a quarterback takes a lesser expected fall out of the top 5 and therefore tumbles down the board all told. Then you have a team like the Minnesota Vikings who loves picking up more assets. I watched the New Orleans Saints trade away their entire day 3 to the Minnesota Vikings just a few years ago to draft Adam Troutman, a tight end. Like and then speaking of that, the New Orleans Saints, who I cover, they love to trade up. They're all F them picks. They will trade a future first to go up and get the guy that they love. They will move around multiple times within a draft. You look at last year, they added a first round pick. They advanced a 2023 first rounder to a 2022 first rounder. Ended up costing them a top 10 pick in this year's draft by the time it was all said and done. But when they were doing it, the idea was they went in with 2 prospects that they really wanted. Chris Olave was absolutely one of them. They got Trevor Penning. They moved up to make sure that they got Chris Olave once Garrett Wilson and the other receivers started to come off the board. And so they traded to add themselves a second first round pick. And then they advanced one of those first round picks to go and get the guy that they wanted. And so like, to me, those are 2 teams that have the absolute opportunity because of what we've watched them do over and over and over again in 2 different ways, trading back or being aggressive and trading up, that can reshape the first round in its entirety.
Yeah, you're right. They can reshape it. What if something happens with Lamar Jackson? I'll be interested to see, especially if his team in the top 10, I'll be interested to see how Baltimore does there because they're never there. Right. Baltimore's like Ronnie Stanley. That was an outlier. Baltimore is usually never there in that position, but they are always where they are now in the 20s. And I can tell you right now, I don't know who it's going to be. They're either going to draft a defensive back or they're going to draft a tweener. They're going to draft some edge dude that's like 6'4", 255, and we're going to go, it's a little too high, but because it's Baltimore, that's their type of player. So I do think that there's a bit of a difference with the teams that have to pick high, like Jacksonville. 9 out of 10 years were picking very high, where you have to take this prospect that everyone has already mocked to you. There's a big difference between teams like that and teams that are perpetually picking 28th, and they just sit there and it's like, come to me. It's like just whoever. Wait. They can take a chance on the dude that might have a little bit of a deficiency, and they end up getting a really, really good player. So that's something that we really have to watch in this draft as well.
The Atlanta Falcons are a perfect example of that. Their willingness to sit down, be patient, and go. You'll hear this phrase all the time: BPA, best player available. That's what the Atlanta Falcons will do, and that's how they get their AJ Terrells. That's how they get their Drake Londons. It works. It works for the teams that make it work. But winning at the podium and winning in the offseason isn't what's most important. Tony mentioned earlier that there are certain things that teams change maybe too consistently, particularly at the head coaching position. How does that just mess everything up regardless of how good your favorite team does in the offseason or at the podium? We're going to discuss that as we continue on to wrap up today's episode of Locked On NFL, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On NFL brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, the number one sportsbook in all of America, numero uno. You got to love them. NBA playoffs are on the way. I'm hoping that my New Orleans Pelicans can get there. We'll see what happens. They got the play-in spot. I don't have much faith beyond that. So we'll see exactly how that all goes. But you've got that. You've got futures. The win totals for the NFL season are up as well. You've got like the Kansas City Chiefs at 11.5 as their over-under or set at their win total. They're at the very top of that list. The Philadelphia Eagles, who squared off with them in the Super Bowl, they're at 10.5. I like that one a lot. So there's a lot of really good ones out there. And there's a few of those 8.5 win teams where all you got to do is are they going to have a winning season or a losing season? And that'll get you taken care of over at FanDuel. And hey, if you're a first-time user, you're also going to be able to get a no-sweat first bet of up to $1,000. It's bonus bets that comes back to you if your first bet doesn't win, meaning that there's no losing on your first bet. So go ahead and check that out today at FanDuel.com/lockedon so that you can get into that no sweat first bet of $1,000 in free bets or in bonus bets. Once again, that is FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, everybody, we are wrapping up this episode of Locked On NFL. Winning the off season can be a lot of fun for a fan base, right? It can be so much fun. Yeah. And then you get up on the podium and then you're waiting and the coach not the coach, I'm sorry, whoever's announcing the picks during that round, they say the exact name that you were thinking. Oh, that's so exciting. They got my guy. But does that always translate to success in season? No. And I think one of the major reasons why that happens is teams having a lack of identity because of the changes elsewhere. And particularly how quickly teams move on from, I'm going to expand this conversation a little bit, coaches and quarterbacks to get to Pete Carroll's point during the combine, where he said, I think we as the NFL, we move on from quarterbacks way too quickly in terms of his conversation around Geno Smith. That can screw up every bit of progress you feel like you made in the offseason, no matter how well you did.
Yeah, you're right, Ross. I think we really won't ever get this answer from coaches because everything is tied to enthusiasm. Everything is tied to a single year's enthusiasm. That's why fans never get angry. They'll get angry at a team, but then no matter what that team says or does in the offseason, like right now, I think the Jaguars are moving too slow. I think they want to run it back, but they were 9-8 and they were down 27-0 in the playoffs. But they want to bring everybody back. They're not signing all of these extra players. My thing with that is that's all cool and that's all fine. The thing that gets me is that the fans go, trust him. After 1 year, we trust Trent Baalke. He knows what he's doing. Y'all called him a clown last year, though, because the thing is, like, coaches won't ever tell you that we can't be competitive this year. But their actions say that they know they can't be competitive this year. And that's why sometimes they slow play things, right? Yep. And they'll never tell you we're on a 3-year plan because what's the fan base supposed to do for the next 2 years?
Right.
What are the players in the locker room supposed to do for the next 2? That's something you'll never hear come out of their mouth. But if you watch how they act and how they move, you can tell when bad teams know that they're on a rebuild. You can also tell when good teams know they need to go for it, when they're really, really close, and how they'll go out and they'll get that last guy and it'll try to take them over the hump. I just think, just like when we talk about the salary cap right before free agency, fans go, we can't afford that. We don't have the cap space. Year after year, we sit here and tell people that the cap isn't real, right?
It doesn't matter.
Right. It doesn't matter. So when draft night comes, here's the question I pose to Jaguar fans. What if they throw a draft party at the stadium? You go out with all your friends. They're picking 24th. You're drinking. You're having a blast. It's 30,000 people at the stadium. And then they trade back to 33 and you realize we came out here and those suckers ain't even picking. You would be deflated. When really there's no need to be deflated because the goal wasn't to win Thursday night.
Right.
The goal is to do whatever it takes to win in January. And it's like fans get caught up in this every single year. You have to pay attention to the individual situation. We mentioned it earlier. Frank Reich, the way he's going to move, to me, it's a 3-year plan. He can go totally different than anybody else. I don't know if Matt Eberflus can do that in Chicago. Somebody might be saying, you better get something done right now. Nobody knows that more than Reich because the last year in Indy, that's exactly what he did. He was like,
what happened?
We got to go for it. And it usually ends you up in the unemployment line. I think we have to be patient with these teams that take a long-term approach. And that starts with me not being angry at the way Jacksonville is moving.
For sure. And I look at, a team like the Detroit Lions, who are a perfect example of a team that will tell the entire world with their actions, we're on a 2-3 year plan, but will present themselves as a team in every facet as a team that can win a Super Bowl. You looked at when they traded away Matt Stafford and they got Jared Goff back in that trade, what'd they say? We really like Jared Goff. We think he can lead us to a Super Bowl. But what did that move say? All right, we're going to sit back and chill for a couple of years. Like, we're going to reset. We're going to figure out our identity. We're going to get all this done. Just got the new coaching staff in the building. We're going to rebuild our culture, all those other things. And that's what they did. And then look where it got them. Almost got them to the playoffs last year. Yeah. And it got to a point where they played maybe one of their best games in Week 18 last year.
Yep.
And
think about the Jets.
Yep.
The Jets won't give up that first pick in the draft. They're talking, there's rumors that not only they're going to get Aaron Rodgers and give up something other than the 13th pick, but they're going to need that 13th pick to help him. I've heard Bijan Robinson. I heard all of this stuff. And then they're going to sign Odell Beckham. So with that in mind, think about it. If this doesn't work, do you realize how far this sets them back?
Right.
If this doesn't work, and I'm talking about, and it's got to work in year one, I don't think it's going to work in year two.
It has to.
If it doesn't work in year one, what happens? So the mindset of Robert Saleh, who's trying to save his job. By the way, did you see his pictures? You see, he looks like The Rock or something. But anyway,
put him out there.
Yeah. Or go tell him you fired without security.
Let me see you. That's what he's doing. That's what he's doing. He's like, come fire me. I dare you.
You fired. What? Excuse me? What'd you say?
I can't hear you over these biceps right quick.
Right. So the thing is as much enthusiasm as the Jets have for what they're trying to do, you got to really, really be careful, man. The Rams got paid for it, but then last year they went all in again, and guess what? Didn't work.
It ain't work.
And now they're getting rid of it's a yard sale. They're getting rid of everything and everybody, and they're totally starting over. That's a good question. I wonder for people. I did a poll, and I asked Jaguar fans if you could do what the Boston Celtics did when they took Larry Bird, draft him a year before he comes out. And that was a loophole back in the day.
Oh, yeah.
That a guy who was in college for 4 years, you could give up your draft pick for his rights. So when Bird played at Indiana State that last year, he knew he was going to be a Celtic before the year started. If Jaguar fans, I said, if you could give up the 24th pick for Brock Bowers, the rights to him, the Georgia tight end, would you do it? It was 50-50, yes and no. I was shocked that it wasn't higher. Yeah. And some of the answers and the responses are, we're going for a Super Bowl. We're going to need that 24th pick. Oh, so you mean Osiris Torrance? You're going to need Osiris Torrance to get you to the Super Bowl for this 1 year. But Brock Bowers, who's a generational talent, who's George Kittle and Gronk combined, if you can have him for 10 years with Trevor Lawrence, you don't want. And I'm like, are you kidding me? If that kid was in the draft right now, he'd be a top 10 pick, and you wouldn't take him for 10 years, just all for this one season. It's wild. It's wild to think about it, man. But I just want everybody to be cognizant of that and watch on draft night. Watch the teams that seemingly draft for tomorrow because they know realistically they can't win it today. And then watch with those teams that the Chiefs do both ways. The Chiefs draft for tomorrow, and guess what? It pays off today. Yeah. So, but, the quarterback, going back to what you said in segment one, it's all about getting the right quarterback. And that's the luxury. That's why in our first segment we talked about the risk versus reward, because once you get to that point, you can do just about anything you want, and it's always going to work.
Yep. I have covered a team that for 16 years did not have any major changes. No major change at GM, no major change at head coach, no major change at quarterback. That was Mickey Loomis, Sean Payton, Drew Brees, 16 years in a row. And it allowed them to go into the draft every single year and say, we'll see who falls, or let's go get our guy, right? They were luxury picks year after year after year after year because the most important piece on that team was in place. And the triumvirate of head coach, general manager, and quarterback never changed, never shifted. And that made such a big difference in terms of their ability and their strategy then versus what their strategy has been now over the course of the past 2 years when one of those three guys is still in the building. And that's just Mickey Loomis at this point. That makes such a big difference to have that consistency.
Yeah, I learned a new word, triumvirate. So when you listen to my podcast, Ross, and you critique me, I'm gonna use that word triumvirate the way people use narrative these days. I'm gonna say it. I'm gonna use it out of context. Don't just be triumvirate and all over the place. But here's my thing. I was born in 1969. Mm-hmm. They got a song, Summer of '69. It was that long ago, right? When I was a kid, there was ABC, NBC, CBS, and PBS. Fox didn't even exist. Okay,
Fox wasn't a thing. Yeah.
Wasn't a thing, right? Dial-up telephones, where if you had to dial a long distance number and somebody was chasing you, you was gonna get caught because you had to wait to that thing. Because I said all of that to say this: I am almost 54 years old, and I'm gonna tell you, every time we talk about consistency, I have to do this. The Pittsburgh Steelers in my lifetime have had 3 coaches. That's why I brought all of that stuff I just brought up. There was no cable TV. There were no pagers. There were no cell phones when I was born. And since then, the Pittsburgh Steelers have had 3 coaches. That is, I think that is the most unbelievable thing in terms of triumvirate and all of this stuff. It's the most unbelievable thing when you talk about the dynamic of organizational consistency because they keep things the same. I have never, ever, ever seen anything like that. And I don't think we ever will.
Never see anything like that again. Shout out to Mike Tomlin for getting it done. All right, y'all. We appreciate you so much, as always, for joining us here for another episode of Locked On NFL here on this Friday. Don't forget, we'll be right back with you on Monday. Kevin Ostreicher bringing you the 3 biggest stories, the 3 biggest teams from around the NFL, making sure you're all caught up, all set up after the weekend and going into the week. Tony Wiggins at Shop Talking Wig on Twitter. You can catch him on Wednesday's episodes along with James Rapine. I'm here every Tuesday with Luke Braun. We appreciate you so much for making us your first listen, making us part of your day, making us a part of your routine. Make sure you go and check out Locked On NFL Scouting as well. Our guys, Kyle Krabs, Joe Marino, the Draft Dudes, showing you what it takes to build a successful NFL franchise. Conversations like these every single Monday through Friday. Find them on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. See you here soon.